Welcome, all you wiretappers out there. I'm here with my friend from Toronto, Canada. I'm here with my friend from Toronto, Canada, Nate Henley. He's a true crime writer. He's done a lot of things with organized crime, as you guys know, but he's got another one out. I think his most recent book called "The Boy on the Bicycle," which I found interesting. You know, we just had a policeman on here called two. We just had my friend we just had my friend Michael Callahan, former Illinois state trooper, on here who wrote that book about a wrongful conviction that he worked up in northern Illinois. And it was an interesting story. I kind of like those stories of wrongful convictions and people that ferret that stuff out. And this most recent book of Nate's is The Boy on the Bicycle, and it's about a young kid, 14-year-old Ron Moffat of Toronto, who was wrongly convicted of murdering a child in 1956, and the real offender was a serial killer. So, Nate, welcome. You want to help us understand what happened up there in Toronto with this murder?
Sure, absolutely. My pleasure, Gary. Nice to be back. My book, as Gary said, is called The Boy on the Bicycle, and it's about a wrongful conviction case that happened in Toronto in the 50s. And the interesting thing is that very few people remember this case for various reasons, which I'll get into as I go. The quick summary is a family, the Millette family, were visiting Toronto on September 1956. They were from Sealy's Bay, which is a small little community near Kingston, Ontario. They were visiting the grandmother of the family grandmother, who was they were visiting the mother of the Millette. Sorry, that up totally. They were visiting a grandmother who lived in Toronto. And on the evening of September 15th, 1956, little 7-year-old Wayne wandered away from his grandmother's home. His grandmother lived in East End, Toronto. The older Millette brothers wanted to go to see a movie, didn't really want their little brother tagging along, so they said, "You stay with grandma." So 7-year-old kid, he wanders around, and he's near the grounds in Toronto. It's called the Canadian National Exhibition, CNE. And it's this year-round fairgrounds that they have in the autumn, big exposition, and they have music, and they have circus stuff. They have various games. They have animal shows. All these sort of different things. September 15th, the grounds were closed, but little Wayne is sort of wandering around, bumps into teenage boy riding a bicycle, which is where the title of the book comes from, The Boy on the Bicycle. This teenage boy was named Peter Woodcock. He was a serial predator who biked around the city. He was a 17-year-old at the time. Bike around the city, encounter children, and convince them to go with him to private places. Then he would molest them and beat them up. So he tried this on little Wayne. Wayne apparently grew scared, and a scuffle ensued, and little Wayne was suffocated. His face was pressed into the dirt. This obviously, so little Wayne was killed. Peter Woodcock bikes away, encounters a security guard, and has this weird conversation with him about, "You ever find bodies in the bushes and stuff like this?" Then he bikes off. After little Wayne doesn't return home, his parents grow alarmed. Police are called. Police start searching around, and little Wayne is found dead on the grounds of the Canadian National Exhibition. Obvious, terrible family tragedy. That same evening, 14-year-old Ron Moffat, he's watching a movie with friends at a movie theater, and he has the unfortunate bad timing to get into a big fight with his parents early the next week. Plays hooky from school. His dad finds out. He's worried about getting into trouble. So he decides to hide out. And he takes some clothes and food and hides basically in his parents' apartment building. His parents report him missing. And at the time, police were searching through cases of missing teenagers. That the suspect in this case of the murder of little Wayne was a teenage boy on a bicycle. Well, Ron Moffat was 14, so he fits the age demographic, and he had worked at Canadian National Exhibition. So police put two and two together, and they're thinking, okay, this is interesting. And he ran away, right after the murder. So obviously, maybe guilty conscience. Police find Ron. They don't bother telling his mother that they located him. They take him to a police station, interrogate him without a lawyer, without a parent present, without a guardian, and just drill into the kid. According to Ron later, they didn't physically beat him or anything, but he felt that threat that was very much in the air, that it was sort of like, he said, one of the cops said, if you don't answer our questions, things are going to get rough here. And Ron Moffat confesses. Now, according to Ron, he said the police just sort of fed him questions and he would give them the answers they wanted. I actually have a copy of his alleged confession, and it does contain a lot of very leading questions. Did you move the body here? Oh yeah, I did, blah, blah, blah. Police then take him to the CNE and walk him through the crime scene. According to police, Ron said, oh yeah, here's where I encountered Wayne. Here's where we committed the crime. According to Ron, it was the other way around. Police would point to an area and say, that's where you first saw Wayne, right? He'd agree. Now, at the time, and still today, a lot of people don't understand why you would confess to something you didn't do. And Ron's explanation is, okay, he's a 14-year-old kid. He was from a rough family. He was a working class family, and his parents, drank a bit on the weekends. He had a scrape with the law before when he was younger. Him and a buddy tried to break into the St. Lawrence Market. He got probation for that. So a bit of a rough and ready background, doesn't know a lot about things. He's got these two cops badgering him. And he said, like, anyone in that position, you're 14, you'll eventually agree to anything just to get out of that. And that sort of is confirmed by later research I did that found that the rate of false confessions is actually much higher than people think. That there was a study done of people who've been exonerated from death row by DNA evidence. And of the cases, something like 16-20% involved a false confession. So these guys had confessed to something science says they didn't do. Yeah. And the rate of false confession, go ahead.
I had a situation once. I was a young policeman, got assigned to a murder investigation. I was working burglaries at the station, and they needed some extra help for a homicide investigation because it was a big, scary one for everybody in the city. There was somebody with the same gun was robbing stores and killing the clerks. And they hit a dirty bookstore first and killed that clerk, and then about a week later robbed a Radio Shack and killed two young guys. They're about 18, 19 years old, their first jobs, and killed both of them with the same gun. Then he went out to Independence and killed a convenience store clerk with the same gun. And boy, I tell you, the city was on edge. Anybody that worked in a store was on edge. And that was back when everybody read the newspaper, and it was big headlines in the newspaper. And I got assigned to that. And I had an informant out there on the street, and he got hold of me, and he said, I've got a guy that said that he's a suspect on this. He did this. I said, you mean he's like bragging about it? He said, yeah. He said, he's telling everybody down here in the neighborhood that he's the one that killed those two kids downtown at the Radio Shack. And these were young black kids, and they all like to go downtown and do little hooligan things, whether they steal out of the stores or whatever. And he was from what we'd call a notorious crime family. He had several brothers who had been involved in crime, and he was about 16 or 17. So I went to the sergeant over the squad, and I was brand new. I mean, I'd never been assigned to a squad like this before, Big Red Horner. And he said, okay. He said, first thing let's do, he said, let's get your informant in and put him on the lie box. So we had my informant, and he was a good kid. He was about 18 himself and just a street kid. He came in and he passed the lie box. So we get this kid in one evening. About a day or two later, we get him in, and since it's my deal, I'm the one that gets to interrogate him and try to get the confession, because we didn't have any other physical evidence right then. We didn't, when we arrested him, we didn't find a gun or didn't have anything but the unsubstantiated word of an informant. And I start questioning him, and he immediately starts breaking down, and he starts admitting that he killed these two guys. And I'm thinking, boy, I'm a hero here, man. And believe me, policemen's egos get into these kinds of things. You think you're going to solve a horrendous crime like that? I mean, you're going to go down in lore as the guy that solved the murder of the two Radio Shack guys. And he's breaking down, and I'm like thinking, damn. So I go out of the interrogation room, and I find an old-time detective, Kenny Fisher. And I said, Kenny, I said, this guy's breaking down to this. He said, okay, so just a minute. Let me come in there and talk to him. So Kenny comes in, and he starts talking to him, and this guy was a long-time homicide detective. So he starts asking this kid, he said, okay, he said, tell me what you did when you went in there. And this kid just, well, he said, I went in and robbed the store, and I just shot him. He said, well, no. He said, now, he said, did you get any money out of it? He said, yeah, I got some money. He said, now, well, where did you get the money from? And the kid said, he said, Mom, they gave me the money. And I said, well, tell me. And he said, well, tell me exactly how he got the money for you. And he's always said, the kid walked over and ding, hit the cash register and took all the money out and handed me the money. And it had been in the paper that there was money was taken from these places. And Kenny just stands up and he says, come out here. So we go out in the hall. He said he didn't do it. I said, what do you mean he didn't do it? He just told us he did it. He described the crime scene and everything. He said, because there was no cash register in that place. There was a money drawer. And so he could not have rang the cash register up, and he had reached down and take it out of the drawer. Had he said he took it out of the drawer, then we got something. We kicked that kid loose, and about a week later, we found the real guy. but I still can't figure why he wanted to confess. It's a mystery to me to this day. I have no idea what his name was. I don't know what happened to him after that, but they do that.
Yep. Yeah, I talked to a lawyer, and he said, the rate of false confessions much higher than people think, and it tends to be much higher in cases where the suspect is a juvenile, if they're not terribly intelligent, and if they're addled by booze or drugs or something. Often their memory's a bit foggy. 2 days ago, you did this, and they literally can't remember. And especially if you don't have a lawyer or parent present. And unfortunately, with a lot of these things from the 50s, they weren't recorded.
Yeah.
Okay, so this interrogation was not taped. Obviously, they didn't have videotape, obviously, at the time. So we only really have, the police's word for it. That this is what exactly transpired. And I guess other reasons to falsely confess: attention seeking. Sometimes these guys think that okay, I'm accused of murder. That'll make me really cool if I confess. Pressures of the moment, obviously. Intimidation, obviously, is a big one. And I think people forget just that being interrogated is not supposed to be a pleasant experience. And some people will just confess to anything just to get it to end.
Yeah.
So Ron confesses, and he's put on trial. But by the time he gets to trial, December 1956, a second kid had been murdered in Toronto. A little boy named Gary Morris, who was murdered by a boy on a bicycle who approached him, took him to a secluded place, molested him, and then stomped him to death, basically. So police at the time came up with these really strange conclusions. Like, one guy was quoted in the paper as saying, well, maybe the person who killed Gary Morris read about the Wayne Millette killing, and this triggered him, and he imitated this killing. So basically he's saying there's two different teenagers riding around the city on bicycles, approaching kids, killing, which is like not too real, not too realistic. Part of the problem is that Toronto was a very safe city at the time. 1956, there was only 9 recorded murders in the whole city. Wow. This is a city with a population of 650,000 people or so. So police just didn't have a lot of experience dealing with murder, much less sort of a serial killer picking on children. And the whole concept of molesting kids was sort of off the radar for a lot of people. And so this blinkered, I think, the police's investigation. So Ron goes on trial December 1956, and he's convicted for almost no evidence against him except his confession. And there's, quote, bite mark evidence that little Wayne had bite marks on him, and the police hired someone to check, make casts of the teeth marks and said, oh, yeah, it's a perfect match to Ron's mouth. All these other witnesses testified, well, I was at the movie theater with Ron all night. And like a parade of them, I actually have a list of like about a dozen people who said, I was in the theater with this guy. So the Crown prosecutor, that's the Canadian version of like the DA, district attorney, he comes up with this great theory that, well, Ron did go to the movies, but he slipped out of the movies, stole a bicycle, biked to the CNE because he used to work there, encountered little Wayne, killed Wayne, encountered the security guard on his bike, ditched the bike, went to a restaurant for a bite to eat, then somehow went back to the movie theater. And none of his friends noticed that he was like sweaty or freaked out, or, most 14-year-olds who just killed a little boy with their bare hands might be a little agitated.
Yeah.
But, no one reported anything like that. So this theory made very little sense, and it made even less sense when he realized Ron Moffat couldn't actually ride a bicycle. So he had inner ear damage, so he has balance problems.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he had boxed a bit as a kid, and he got smacked in the head or something, and it screwed his ear up.
Mm-hmm.
So he had equilibrium problems, like maintaining balance, so he couldn't ride a bike. So it doesn't matter. He gets convicted. He gets shipped off to what's called a training school, which is a juvenile facility. Then a third kid gets killed, a little girl, Carolyn Boyce, January 1957. Police finally figure out that, okay, maybe we put the wrong guy in jail. Through some circumstances, which I detail in my book, police track down this guy, Peter Woodcock, who right from birth was a very strange kid. He was given up for adoption. His mother was allegedly a prostitute. He had a number of mental problems. He had no friends. He had very strange behaviors and habits. One of the stories was that he had allegedly killed a family bird and then arrayed the corpse on a piano with candles and such.
Yeah.
He was never formally adopted, but he was taken in by a foster family, fairly wealthy. They took him to various psychiatrists. They put him in special schools. Nothing worked. He was just this bizarro kid who was sort of in his own little world. And when he was an adolescent, he starts biking around the city and molesting kids. So he's taken into custody. He readily confesses. There's no pressure on him. He just, oh, yeah, I did all this. Long story short, Peter Woodcock is put on trial April 1957. He's found not guilty by reason of insanity.
Yeah.
But, okay, got to understand the context. That doesn't mean he walks out of jail, out of the court. At the time, that meant he's put into a psychiatric institution until they deem him cured. So it's another form of incarceration, basically.
Yeah.
They ship him off to a psychiatric facility. And then a month later, Peter Woodcock testifies in a retrial of Ron Moffat. Ron had got a good family lawyer. His family had got a good lawyer for Ron. He won an appeal. Ron was given a second trial. And very interesting, at the second trial, Peter Woodcock testifies saying, I did the killing. I killed little Wayne. In fact, Peter Woodcock was apparently a little miffed that someone else was taking credit for this killing. And the dental technicians who at the first trial said that these bite marks totally matched Ron Moffat, all of a sudden they say, oh, no, we made a mistake. They don't match at all.
Mm-hmm.
And Ron, when I interviewed him, thought that might be kind of a conspiracy. I think it's more just, it was junk science, like bite mark investigation is considered even today pretty unreliable. So you can imagine in 1956 what this was like.
Yeah,
So
really unreliable.
evidence is heard, and the judge acquits Ron. Judge says it's interesting because the judge acquits him but scolds him for like, oh, you should have told the truth. Makes it kind of like his fault.
Yeah.
But he says, I don't think that you did it. So he said all the evidence points to Peter Woodcock and points to really Ron Moffat. You're free to go. See you later. So Ron is let out. But the sad part is that, well, two sad things. He never received an official apology. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That he never received an apology from the judge or police or the government or anything. And his parents were too broke to launch a lawsuit for compensation. So, you know, some of these wrongful conviction cases, they have lawsuits and they win multi-million-dollar settlements. Nothing like that for Ron, because his parents just, they were broke. They wanted to put it behind them. So they just, you know, they never pursued that avenue. And the third thing that was a little sad about the case, Ron was tried as a juvenile. Okay? Now, the good part of that meant under Canadian law, he couldn't be hanged because he was a juvenile, but it meant his name was kept out of the papers. A blessing at the time, but what it meant was that over the years, everyone just forgot about his case because it's kind of hard to remember a case of, like, the papers covered this story extensively, but they never put his name in. They just say 14-year-old boy or a suspect. So it's a little hard to remember that over the decades. Oh, that guy from the 50s who they never named, never got compensation. So when I started doing research into the case, I realized that no one remembered this. This was like a huge front page story in the 50s, but no one knew who Ron Moffat was.
Yeah.
The case itself had largely been forgotten, except in context with Peter Woodcock. And compared to, there's some other more high-profile wrongful conviction cases in Canada that everybody knows who these people are. There's Stephen Truscott, David Milgaard. These are very famous names that everyone, oh yeah. So I was the first one to do a full book about Ron. He contacted me, wanted to tell his story, and he trusted me with this terrible, thing that he trusted me with the story of this terrible ordeal he went through as a teenager.
Really?
And he's a strong, resilient man.
Nate, how old was he when you first interviewed him or talked to him?
Let's see. He got in touch with me in like 2012, and he was born in, I can give you the exact, he was about 75 or so when he got in touch with me. I can give you the exact date if you want. And here. Yeah, he was born in 1942.
Okay.
So he was in his 70s. Yeah, and we communicated.
In his 70s when he got a hold of you.
Yep. And we communicated via email, Skype, and phone for a number of years, and then we finally got together. I had to verify, of course, his story. And he's a wonderful guy. I mean, he managed to pull his life together. He was pretty messed up for a long time, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
He had issues with alcoholism. He's had some psychiatric treatment, but he pulled himself together. He worked as a caretaker for a school in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. And married twice. He has grandchildren. Active social life, active family life now, and amazing, because I think most of us, if that happened to you at 14, you just like basket case for your life.
Yeah.
And he's very big on now, like about reforming the Canadian the way police interrogations are done in Canada for juveniles. He thinks very strongly that you should have a parent, like a mandatory parent present. Because even today, under Canadian law, like a juvenile, and I'm talking under 18, they can ask for a lawyer or parent, but often they're too either dopey or naive, and they don't realize how much trouble they're in, or they're too embarrassed.
Yeah.
You're like 16, you're accused of something, you really want mom there. Most of them would say no, and they don't realize that, no shit, kid, you really should have someone there. So I'm very much in favor of that too, of having some sort of mandatory counsel for juveniles and recording everything,
Really.
um, just to make
You
these
know,
things.
people don't realize the power that a kid will give to a policeman in
Yep,
that setting. They
right,
just, not only he's physically much bigger, and it's usually a man, and doesn't always have to be a man, but physically much bigger and older, and a kid is, got this, ill-formed world view,
right.
and it's pretty easy to get a kid to say, I want to help you out here, and pretty soon, if you're good at it, this was one thing I was always good at with suspects is like pretty soon they like thought I was their friend, and I was trying
Hmm.
to help them because that's how you do it. That's the best way. That always worked for me, is convince them that I'm trying to help you. I'm your lifeline, dude. I
Right.
can help you. You just got to start talking about this a little bit, and I'm going to work for you. I'm going to make sure that if you did it, usually you start off with somebody else did it, and as soon as you get them to to start talking about it a little bit as if somebody else did it, then pretty soon you start bringing them around, and you're their friend, you're
Yeah,
their
yeah.
lifeline, and it's a lot easier with a kid than it is with a 25-year-old man who's been around a little bit.
Right, right.
I
Exactly.
remember one guy started doing that with him, and then kind of got tough when he wasn't coming around. And this dude says, "Man," he says, "I've been cuffed around all my life." He said, "You ain't doing anything with me." I said, "Okay, I'm done here."
Yeah, yeah. See ya.
I couldn't do the tough guy stuff and threaten to beat him up or whack him around or anything like that, like you see in the movies, and they actually did back in the '60s and up to about the
Hmm.
'70s. And we kind of quit it by the middle '70s, I would say. I wasn't any good at that, but I was pretty good at getting their confidence and making them think I was their friend and I was their lifeline. I
Yeah,
was going to
yeah.
help them out. Now usually it works, and they really did it. But you take a real immature kid like that with a guilty conscience about something else, or just who knows what, some screw loose in his brain and bad chemicals or whatever. You don't know how he
Hmm.
was raised, and a lot of them are from, raised in really bad circumstances.
Yeah, and the tragedy with the Ron Moffat case is that not only not only, did police sort of railroad this innocent 14-year-old into a concussion, it meant the real killer was still at large.
Right. Yeah.
Two more children had to die and destroy their families before they realized, they had made a mistake. And if they had figured that out right at the start, then, maybe some of this could have been nipped in the bud. And I think that's something to always keep in mind, when people talk about wrongful convictions. And sometimes some people are a little blasé and they're like, well, yeah, if they got somebody, or the suspect, I'm sure they're guilty of something. And it's like,
Right.
okay, but if you get the wrong guy, that means the real guy's still
Yeah.
out there,
Yeah.
and God only knows what they're going to do. And that's a pretty horrible thing.
Yeah. I've heard that said before. Well, he did
Yeah,
something. you
yeah,
know,
and it's like, well,
Screw him. He did. I
okay,
know he did something. Maybe it
yeah,
wasn't this, but he did something. I know that thought
exactly,
process, and I've heard that
exactly,
said before. It's kind of scary. I think we're
yeah,
much more sophisticated today. I know in the United States, they have to, a kid, you can't just talk to a kid anymore.
right,
Here's how we used to do it sometimes. We had a little burglar in once. And my partner took his walkie talkie and he had an earpiece for it. And he stuck his walkie talkie down in the drawer, and the kid didn't notice it. And then he reached down the drawer and he pulled the plug-in part, the little 1/8 inch plug-in part that goes into the walkie-talkie, and he pulled it out and he handed this kid, and he said, "Here," he said, "hold it. I'm gonna give you a lie detector test. Hold this up against your chest." The kid held it up
hmm,
against his chest, and we started asking questions. And John, my partner, would open up that door and he said, "Oh, no, no, you're lying. You're lying on that." So now tell us
uh,
what really happened. And then he'd go, "Oh," and then he'd like correct himself a little bit.
yeah, yeah,
And then one time he said, "Now I'm not getting a reading. Push that a little harder in your chest." So he's pushing it into his chest a little harder. He broke down on all. What we really wanted him to do was break down on his buddies who were burglarizing
right,
everybody in the neighborhood. They'd have these little, 9, 10, 11-year-old gangs that would start burglarizing all the neighbors' homes and getting their, like change out of their uh, change jar, or maybe a
Right.
TV. Usually not even that, just little things.
Hmm.
And then once you caught two or three of them, throw them in juvenile court, and they never really went away. But at that age, but it made the neighbors a lot better. So that's how I justify doing that kind of interrogation. We had the
Hmm.
major over the youth unit. We were in the youth unit. The major stuck his head in, and he said, "I don't even want to know what's going on," and shut the door. But we broke up a little gang. But in a murder and things like that, it's got to be done right. It is just has to be done
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
absolutely, that if we got caught doing that today, they'd probably fire us. So
Yeah,
things are different today. Well, this
absolutely.
has been great. Really, really interesting story, folks. I'd recommend, if you like that kind of thing at all, that you get that Boy on the Bicycle by Nate Henley. And Nate's a pretty prolific writer. I see you've got The Big Con, Great Hoaxes, Frauds, Grifts, and Swindles in American History.
Oh yeah.
We need
Hmm.
to do some. I love those con games and those more complex kind of crimes. We need to pick out a couple of those and
Oh, absolutely.
tell me about some of those one of these
Sure.
days.
Sure.
You've got
Let's
kind of
come
an
back.
overview of the Mafia Guide to the Mafia Guide to an American Subculture.
Hmm.
You've got American Gangsters Then and Now. Stephen Truscott, Decades of
Yeah, it's
Injustice. What is that?
another wrongful conviction case. And
Okay.
that one's interesting because he is well known because he was 14, tried for murder in the 50s, 1950s, and he was tried as an adult. So his name was in the paper. So
Yeah.
that's why everybody knows about Stephen Truscott, but no one's heard of Ron Moffat, even though the crimes and the suspects, both of them are 14, both cases 1950s, very similar.
Interesting. Then you got Dutch Schultz, the
Yep.
brazen beer baron of New York. He's a character, isn't
Oh
he?
yeah. Oh yeah. He was a bit of a wacky wacko.
He was, and he was so immensely successful. A little bit I know about him. We'll have to do that one of these days.
Sure.
Little bit I
Sure.
know about him. He was. I don't know how he was so successful. I guess just from
I'll tell you all
being
about it.
brazen.
Yeah, yeah.
You got to tell us all about it. And we
Oh
got
yeah. Oh yeah.
your
I'll
Al
tell you.
Capone book
Hmm.
and Bonnie and Clyde. So
Oh yeah.
Bonnie and Clyde. I did myself and another retired police officer did a motorcycle tour of Bonnie and Clyde sites throughout the Mid-South and this
Oh
all the way
really?
down to Louisiana. And I'd stop and at some of the memorial and the markers mainly where the policemen got killed, there would be a
Right.
marker. And so I would
That's
stop and
right.
tell the story of how they got in a shootout with some policemen and then go on to the next. We ended up down at where they got killed down at Gibbsland,
Yeah,
Louisiana.
Louisiana.
They've got an interesting little museum, a little homespun museum operating down there in
Oh yeah.
Gibbsland. Interesting guy that runs it, and just kind of a
Hmm.
homespun deal. No real great. It's like a collection of things that were about Bonnie and Clyde, or might have been
Right.
collected to it, like a car that looks like their car and some things like that. But he's
Okay.
kind of an
Interesting.
interesting guy to talk to. So I interviewed him
Sure.
and threw it up on YouTube. I did this all. I did audio on it, video. It was kind of fun. We got Life and
Interesting.
Times of Canada's Master Bank Robber, Edwin Alonzo Boyd.
Yes, indeed.
And God, you are very prolific. Crystal Death,
I try.
methamphetamine, North America's most dangerous drug, and John Lennon, Music, Myth, and Madness.
Yeah, it's one of the few non-crime related books I've done.
Uh-huh. Oh, and for you budding writers out there, he's got Motivate to Create, a guide for writers.
Hmm.
So, and you do
Good.
some writing, like you do ghost writing for people for a flat dollar amount, or you've done any
Uh,
joint books with people that can't really
I've
do
done.
it.
Yeah, I've done some. I've done a joint book. I did a book about called the book Toronto Book of Everything, and it was a sort of
Mm-hmm.
collective effort, three of us talking about all these exciting things in Toronto,
Yeah.
and that's about the only one I've done a collective thing. I'm always happy to try my hand at new stuff, be it ghostwriting or whatever. You can see all my books, by the way, at natehenley.com. All my books, you're all there.
Yeah, that was www.natehenley, NateHenDley.com.
That's
Got a
right.
blog on there and all your books and way to
Yep.
contact you. And interviews, you got a section for podcast here. You put your podcast that you've done with me up on it one of these days, or at least some. Oh yeah, you do the whole thing, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. It'll go up there.
Okay.
Yep. It'll
so
be up there.
You want me to? You want me just? I'll send you the whole file. Did I send you the other one that we did after I edited it? I don't think I
I'm
did.
not sure. I don't think you did.
When I get done editing these, I'll send all of them up to you.
Great. That'd be terrific.
All right. All right, Nate, I appreciate it. It's been great talking to you.
Okay. Always great talking to you, Gary.
Right.
You stay healthy, and
yeah, you too.
Chat again.
All right, we will.
I got plenty to talk about. You take care.
Right. Thanks, Nate. Bye.
I look forward to hearing all this. Okay.
All right.
You take care. Bye.